You step off the cobblestones of Montmartre and into the thick, blue haze of a basement club. It is 1924, and Paris is vibrating with a nervous, electric energy. The Great War is over, but the shadows it left behind are deep. You smell a mixture of expensive perfume and the sharp, chemical tang of something new. On the velvet tablecloths, next to glasses of absinthe, sit small glass vials filled with a fine white powder. This is heroin. Once sold in pharmacies as a cough suppressant, it has become the secret heartbeat of the city. You watch as artists, socialites, and weary soldiers seek refuge in its cold, numbing embrace. In these dim rooms, the pain of the past dissolves into a dreamlike haze. Welcome to the era of the White Fairy, where the frantic pursuit of pleasure hides a growing, silent desperation. You are standing on the platform of the Gare du Nord in the autumn of 1919. The air is heavy, a thick soup of coal smoke, damp wool, and the metallic tang of the locomotives that have just hissed to a halt. There is a vibration in the ground that you can feel through the soles of your boots, a restless energy that seems to pulse up from the very cobblestones of Paris. For 4 long years, this city held its breath. It was a city of darkened windows and hushed whispers, a city that listened for the thunder of German artillery in the distance. But the guns have finally fallen silent, and as you step out into the gray light of the morning, you can feel the city beginning to exhale. It is a strange, fractured kind of peace. You look around and see a world that is trying desperately to remember how to be happy. Men in faded blue uniforms, the horizon blue of the French army, lean against the pillars of the station. Some are missing sleeves that pinned to their chests. Others have heavy bandages wrapped around their faces, covering the terrible wounds of the trenches. These are the gules casses, the broken faces, the living ghosts of a war that promised to end all wars. They stand in the shadows of the grand arches, watching the crowds with eyes that have seen too much. You walk past them and head toward the center of the city. As you move through the streets, you notice something peculiar. There is a frantic, almost feverish quality to the people you pass. They are not just walking, they are rushing. They are not just talking, they are shouting. It is as if everyone is trying to outrun a memory. This is the beginning of the era the French will call the Annis Falls, the crazy years. It is a time of jazz, of shorter skirts, of avant-garde art, and a wild, desperate pursuit of pleasure. But beneath the glitter and the champagne, there is a lingering rot. There is a sickness that did not leave when the armistice was signed. To understand how Paris became the center of a global drug epidemic, you have to go back to the mud. You have to imagine the field hospitals just a few miles behind the front lines. You are lying on a canvas cot, and the world is a blurred kaleidoscope of pain. The air smells of gangrene and cheap disinfectant. Every time you move, it feels as if a hot iron is being pressed against your flesh. You scream, but your voice is lost in the chorus of 100 other men screaming. Then, a nurse appears. She is tired, her eyes rimmed with red, but she carries a small silver tray. On that tray is a glass syringe and a bottle of clear liquid. She wipes a spot on your arm with a piece of rough gauze. You feel the cold sting of the needle, and then a miracle happens. Within seconds, the pain does not just fade, it vanishes. It is replaced by a warm, golden wave that washes over you, starting from your chest and spreading to your very fingertips. The screams of the ward become distant, like the sound of waves on a faraway shore. The smell of death is replaced by a sense of profound, unshakable peace. For the first time in months, you are not afraid. You are not cold. You are not a soldier in a hole. You are a god. This was the gift of morphine. During the Great War, the French Medical Corps used it on a scale that had never been seen in human history. It was the only way to manage the industrial scale of the suffering. Millions of glass ampoules were shipped to the front. Doctors, overwhelmed by the sheer number of casualties, handed out the needle as if it were water. They called it the soldier's friend. It allowed men with shattered legs to be transported across bumpy roads. It allowed men with shredded lungs to sleep. But when the war ended, the friendship did not. You see a veteran sitting at a cafe table on the Boulevard du Montparnasse. He looks respectable enough in his civilian suit, but his hands are shaking as he lights a cigarette. He reaches into his pocket and feels for a small leather case. Inside is the syringe he smuggled home from the front. He is not wounded anymore, at least not in a way that you can see. His bones have knit back together, and his scars have turned silver. But his mind is still in the trenches. He still hears the whistle of the shells. He still sees the faces of the men who did not come home. For him, and for thousands like him, morphine is the only thing that makes the peace bearable. It is the only thing that fills the hollow space in his chest. In the early 1920s, the French government is slow to realize what is happening. They are so busy rebuilding the bridges and the factories of the North that they do not see the silent army of addicts growing in the heart of the capital. Morphine is not yet a street drug in the way we think of it today. It is a medical problem that is rapidly becoming a social one. You follow the veteran as he leaves the cafe. He does not go to a dark alley or a hidden den. He walks into a brightly lit pharmacy. In 1920, the laws regarding narcotics are still a confusing patchwork of old regulations and new, unenforced decrees. If you have the right look, if you have a sympathetic doctor, or if you simply have enough money, getting a fix is as easy as buying a bottle of aspirin. The pharmacists are often complicit, or perhaps just as overwhelmed as the rest of society. They see the desperate look in the veteran's eyes and they hand over the small blue box without a word. But it is not just the soldiers. As you walk further into the city, into the opulent neighborhoods of the right bank, you realize that the shadow of the needle has reached the highest rungs of society. You enter a salon where the air is thick with the scent of expensive lilies and Turkish tobacco. The women are dressed in silk shifts that shimmer under the crystal chandeliers. The men are in tuxedos, laughing at jokes about the stock market and the latest plays. But if you look closely at their eyes, you see the same dilated pupils you saw in the veteran at the station. For the wealthy, morphine and its more potent cousin, heroin, have become the ultimate fashion accessory. The war has left the upper classes with a sense of profound nihilism. They have seen the old world die in the mud of Verdun, and they no longer believe in the values of their parents. They do not believe in progress or religion or the future. They believe only in the moment, and nothing intensifies the moment like the white powder. It is here, in these elegant drawing rooms, that the term the white fairy begins to circulate. It sounds magical, whimsical, almost innocent. It fits perfectly with the atmosphere of the time, a world that is obsessed with the occult, with spirits, and with escaping the harsh reality of the post-war world. They call it the white fairy because it seems to grant wishes. It grants the wish of forgetting. It grants the wish of euphoria. It grants the wish of feeling nothing at all. As the sun begins to set over the Seine, the city takes on a golden glow. The lights of the cafes begin to flicker on, and the sound of jazz drifts out of the basement clubs. But you are starting to see the cracks in the facade. You pass a woman sitting on a stone bench by the river. She is young, beautiful, but her skin has a sickly, translucent quality. She is scratching at her arms, a rhythmic, unconscious motion. She is waiting for someone. She is waiting for the man who will bring her the little paper packet that will make the world right again. This is the transition point. This is the moment where the medical necessity of the war turns into the recreational craze of the peace. The pharmaceutical companies, like the famous Bayer company in Germany, had originally marketed heroin as a non-addictive alternative to morphine. They thought they had found a cure for the very problem they had helped create. They were tragically, catastrophically wrong. Heroin was not a cure. It was a more powerful, more seductive version of the same demon. You watch as a sleek black car pulls up to the curb near the woman on the bench. A man in a well-tailored coat leans out and hands her something. No words are exchanged. Money changes hands, and the car speeds away, disappearing into the evening traffic. This is the new face of Paris. The city of light is becoming a city of shadows. The trade is moving out of the pharmacies and into the hands of organized syndicates who realize that there is a fortune to be made from the desperation of a generation. The war has left behind a vacuum, and the white fairy has moved in to fill it. It is a silent invasion, one that does not require tanks or planes. It happens one needle at a time, one snorted line at a time, in the back rooms of jazz clubs and the dressing rooms of theaters. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the autumn air. You realize that the excitement you felt when you first stepped off the train was not just the thrill of a city reborn. It was the frantic energy of a city that is trying to burn itself out before the ghosts catch up to it. You look up at the Eiffel Tower, rising like a giant iron ghost over the city. It was built to celebrate human ingenuity and the triumph of the future. But tonight, it feels like a monument to something else. It feels like a needle pointed at the sky, a symbol of a world that has lost its way. The Great War is over, but for Paris, a new and different kind of conflict is just beginning. It is a war for the soul of the city, fought in the veins of its people. And as the music from the clubs grows louder, drowning out the sounds of the street, you realize that the white fairy is just getting started. The shadow of morphine is long, and it is growing darker with every passing hour. This is the world of 1920s Paris, where every party is a funeral for the past, and every fix is a gamble with a future that no one is sure they even want. You step off the curb of the Rue de Rivoli, the soles of your leather boots clicking against the damp cobblestones. It is late afternoon in 1922, and the Parisian sky is a bruised purple, heavy with the threat of another autumn rain. Around you, the city is a blur of motion. Elegant women in cloche hats and fur-trimmed coats hurry toward the tea rooms, their laughter trailing behind them like silk ribbons. Motorcars with brass headlamps rattle past, their tires splashing through puddles, while the distant chime of a tram provides a rhythmic heartbeat to the bustling street. You are looking for a specific kind of relief. The war has been over for 4 years, but the city still feels like it is holding its breath. Everyone you know is nursing a wound, whether it is a physical ache from the trenches or a hollow space in the chest where a brother or a lover used to be. You turn a corner and see it. The green cross of an officine, a pharmacy, glows softly in the twilight. It looks like a sanctuary. As you push open the heavy oak door, a small brass bell chimed above your head. The air inside is a complete contrast to the cold, exhaust-filled streets. It is warm and thick with the scent of camphor, dried lavender, and the sharp, medicinal tang of rubbing alcohol. The walls are lined from floor to ceiling with dark mahogany shelves, stacked with thousands of white porcelain jars and amber glass bottles. Each one bears a label in elegant, hand-painted calligraphy. The pharmacist stands behind a polished counter, his white coat starched and stiff. He looks like a man of science, a man you can trust. He does not look like a dealer in shadows. He looks like a gatekeeper to health. You do not have to whisper here. You do not have to look over your shoulder. You simply lean in and ask for what you need. He reaches for a small, ornate box on the shelf behind him. This is the apothecary's gift. It is a product of the modern age, a miracle of German engineering from the laboratories of the Bayer Company. On the label, the word is printed clearly, heroin. In this world, the word does not carry the weight of tragedy or the stain of the gutter. It sounds grand. It sounds powerful. It sounds, as the name was intended to suggest, heroic. You have to understand that in these early years of the 1920s, heroin is not yet the monster in the closet. It is a refined medicine, a triumph of the chemical revolution. For decades, the world had been enslaved by morphine. Morphine was the great healer of the 19th century, but it was a jealous god. It demanded total devotion from those it healed, leading to a plague of soldier's disease, a polite name for the crushing addiction that followed the American Civil War and the Franco-Prussian War. By the time the 20th century dawned, the medical world was desperate for an alternative. They wanted the power of morphine without the chains. In 1898, a chemist named Felix Hoffmann, working for Bayer, thought he had found the answer. By boiling morphine with acetic acid, he created diacetylmorphine. When the company tested it, they found it was far more potent than morphine, yet they believed it lacked the addictive qualities. They marketed it as a non-addictive cough suppressant and a treatment for everything from asthma to tuberculosis. Imagine you are living in a city where the White Death, tuberculosis, is a constant shadow. Everyone is coughing. Every winter brings a wave of bronchitis and pneumonia that sweeps through the crowded apartments of the working class and the drafty mansions of the wealthy alike. Into this world of gasping breath and blood-flecked handkerchiefs comes a bottle of clear, sweet syrup or a packet of white powder that can stop a cough in its tracks and bring a sense of profound, warm peace to a battered body. Why wouldn't you reach for it? You watch as the pharmacist wraps your purchase in a piece of thick, blue paper and ties it with a thin bit of twine. It is a routine transaction, as mundane as buying a tin of biscuits or a bottle of wine. You pay a few francs, a price that is easily affordable for a middle-class Parisian. In fact, it is often cheaper than a good bottle of Burgundy. You might wonder about the laws. You have heard rumors of a law passed in 1916, right in the middle of the Great War, that was supposed to regulate these substances. It was called the Law on Poisonous Substances. But in the 1920s, the law is like a fence with many holes. It was designed to stop the blatant, open-air sale of opium in the streets, but it struggled to touch the professional world of the pharmacy. If you have a sympathetic doctor, or if you simply look like a person of standing, the pharmacist is unlikely to deny you. To him, you are a patient, not a criminal. As you leave the pharmacy and step back into the cool evening air, you feel a sense of security. You have the gift of the apothecary in your pocket. You walk toward the grand boulevards where the lights of the theaters are beginning to flicker to life. The 1920s are a time of frantic motion, of jazz and speed and the constant pursuit of the new. But beneath that motion is a deep, agonizing tiredness. The soldiers came home from the front with their lungs ruined by mustard gas and their minds fractured by the sight of the impossible. The doctors of Paris found that heroin was a magnificent tool for treating what they called shell shock. It smoothed over the jagged edges of memory. It allowed a man who had seen his friends vaporized in a trench to sit in a cafe and drink a glass of absinthe without his hands shaking. It was a chemical veil that could be drawn over a reality that was too sharp to bear. But it was not just the veterans. You see it in the eyes of the young women who dance until dawn in the clubs of Montmartre. They are the generation that grew up in the shadow of the slaughter. They are determined to live fast because they do not believe in a long future. They use the apothecary's gift to keep the world at bay. It is a way to stay calm in a world that feels like it is spinning out of control. At this point in time, the side effects are seen as manageable. The medical journals of the day discuss the drug with a sense of clinical detachment. They note that while some patients may become fond of the sensation, it is far less dangerous than the old opium dens or the crude morphine injections of the past. There is a belief in the power of the human will and the civilizing influence of the modern clinic. They believe they have tamed the poppy. You reach your apartment, a small space with high ceilings and a view of the chimney pots of the Latin Quarter. You untie the twine and unwrap the blue paper. Inside is a small glass vial. The powder is white, crystalline, and pure. It looks innocent. It looks like salt. There is no social stigma attached to this moment. You are not a pariah. You are simply a modern person taking advantage of modern science. The tragedy of the 1920s heroin craze in Paris is that it began with this sense of legitimacy. It was not born in the dark corners of the docks or the back alleys of the slums. It was born in the bright, sterilized light of the laboratory and distributed through the respectable channels of the medical profession. It was a gift given by men in white coats to a society that was in deep, unspoken pain. As you prepare your dose, you are not thinking about addiction. You are thinking about the quiet that is about to settle over your mind. You are thinking about the way the sounds of the city will fade into a gentle hum. You are thinking about how, for a few hours, the war will be truly over and the future will not matter. This was the legal rise of heroin. It was the era of the respectable fix. But the problem with a chemical veil is that it eventually starts to thin. The apothecary's gift was about to reveal its true price, and the City of Light was about to find out that some debts can never be paid in francs. The transition from the pharmacy to the underworld was closer than anyone cared to admit, and the heroic medicine was about to become the city's greatest ghost. You sit by your window, watching the rain finally begin to fall, feeling the first wave of that artificial warmth, unaware that the world you know is about to be consumed by the very thing you hold in your hand. You leave the quiet of your room and step out into the cool, damp night of Paris. The rain has stopped, leaving the cobblestones of the narrow streets gleaming like the scales of a great serpent winding up toward the summit of the hill. You are headed for Montmartre, the beating, feverish heart of the City of Light. As you begin the steep climb, your breath coming in short, visible puffs of white mist, you feel the first true tug of the substance you took earlier. It is no longer just a warmth in your chest. It is a subtle shifting of the world. The edges of the buildings seem softer, the yellow glow of the gas lamps more inviting, and the distant, muffled sound of a piano feels like it is playing specifically for you. You reach the Place du Tertre, where the painters usually huddle under their umbrellas, but tonight the square belongs to the night owls and the shadows. You walk past the darkened storefronts until you hear it. A low, brassy moan of a saxophone drifting up from a cellar. This is the siren song of the 1920s. This is the era of the Annie's Falls, the crazy years, where the trauma of the Great War is being drowned in a sea of champagne and something far more potent. You find the entrance to a small, unmarked club. You descend a set of steep, stone stairs that smell of damp earth and expensive perfume. As you open the heavy oak door, a wall of heat and sound hits you. The room is packed. Men in tuxedos with loosened collars sit shoulder to shoulder with women in shimmering flapper dresses, their bobbed hair catching the light of the low-hanging chandeliers. The air is a thick, swirling fog of blue cigarette smoke and the sharp, herbal tang of absinthe. But there is another scent here, something faint and medicinal that cuts through the floral, heavy air. In the previous decade, the talk of the town was the Green Fairy, that potent wormwood liquor that sent poets into frenzies. But the Green Fairy is an old ghost now. She has been replaced by a new mistress, one who is silent, crystalline, and devastatingly efficient. They call her the White Fairy. You find a seat at a small, round table in a corner, tucked away behind a velvet curtain. You watch the room with a detached, clinical fascination. This is the playground of the lost generation. To your left, a young American veteran with a jagged scar running down his cheek stares into his glass with unseeing eyes. He is not here for the music. He is here because the White Fairy is the only thing that can quiet the thunder of the cannons that still echo in his mind. Across the room, a famous poet scribbles feverishly on a damp napkin, his eyes wide and dilated. He believes the powder gives him a direct line to the divine, a way to bypass the mundane reality of a world that no longer makes sense. You see a man weaving through the tables. He is dressed impeccably in a dark suit, his movements fluid and cat-like. He does not sell drinks. He is a merchant of dreams. He pauses at a table of socialites, leaning in close as if sharing a scandalous secret. A small, white paper packet, known as a ply, changes hands with the practiced speed of a magician. A few francs are tucked into his palm, and he moves on. This is how the heroin craze of 1920s Paris functions. It is not hidden in the gutters or the back alleys yet. It is right here, in the palm of your hand, served alongside the finest gin and the most avant-garde jazz. You watch as a woman at the next table opens her silver compact. Instead of a powder puff for her cheeks, she produces a tiny, delicate spoon. She dips it into a mound of white powder and lifts it to her nose with a grace that suggests this is a ritual as common as applying lipstick. She inhales sharply, closes her eyes, and leans back. You see the tension drain from her shoulders instantly. A look of profound, glassy peace washes over her face. In this moment, she is untouchable. The debt, the grief, the boredom of her gilded life, all of it has evaporated. The band begins to play a faster tempo, a frantic, syncopated rhythm that would have been unthinkable before the war. The dancers take to the small floor, their bodies moving in a blur of fringe and sweat. The jazz musicians themselves are often the greatest devotees of the White Fairy. You watch the trumpeter, his cheeks bulging, his eyes closed tight. He is playing notes that seem to defy gravity, long, soaring runs that pierce through the chatter of the crowd. For him, the drug is a tool, a way to stretch time, to find the spaces between the beats where a whole lifetime of emotion can be tucked away. But as you sit there, the euphoria you felt earlier begins to take on a heavier quality. You realize that the room is not as beautiful as you first thought. Underneath the shimmer, there is a certain desperation. The laughter is a little too loud, the dancing a little too frantic. You notice the way the light catches the yellowing skin of the poet in the corner. You see the way the American veteran's hands tremble when he reaches for his drink. The White Fairy is a generous mistress, but her gifts are a loan, and she has a way of collecting her interest in the middle of the night. In this era, heroin is still lingering in a strange legal gray area. While the authorities are starting to take notice, it is still shockingly easy to obtain. Many of these people first discovered it in the pharmacies sold as a cough suppressant or a cure for asthma. But once the doors of perception were kicked open, there was no closing them. The pharmacies became the primary suppliers for a whole generation of artists and thinkers. You could walk into a chemist on the Rue de Rivoli and walk out with enough white powder to fuel a week of debauchery, all under the guise of medicinal necessity. As the clock strikes 3 in the morning, the atmosphere in the club shifts. The manic energy of the jazz begins to wind down, replaced by something slower and more melancholic. The piano player is alone on the stage now, playing a soft, haunting melody that sounds like falling rain. You look around and see that many of the patrons have entered what the locals call the stone. They are not asleep, but they are not entirely present either. They are slumped in their chairs, their heads tilted back, lost in a private world of silk and shadow. You feel the weight of the city pressing in on you. The Montmartre you imagined as a place of pure creative fire is also a place of profound disappearance. People come here to be seen, but they also come here to vanish. The White Fairy offers the ultimate disappearing act. She promises that you can stay in this room, in this moment, forever. She promises that the morning will never come, that the gray light of dawn will never reveal the cracked plaster on the walls or the exhaustion in your own eyes. You stand up, your legs feeling heavy and strangely distant. You need air. You navigate your way through the maze of tables, past the beautiful people who are slowly turning into statues. You push open the heavy oak door and climb the stairs back to the street. The air outside is biting and cold, a sharp contrast to the hothouse atmosphere of the club. You stand on the edge of the Butte Montmartre, looking out over the sprawling carpet of Paris. From up here, the city looks like a dream, a collection of twinkling lights and dark voids. You can see the white domes of the Sacré-Cœur glowing behind you like a giant, marble ghost. You realize that what you are witnessing is not just a party. It is a slow-motion collision between the old world and the new. The 1920s are a bridge, and the people you just left behind are trying to cross it without looking down into the abyss. They use the White Fairy as a blindfold. As you begin your descent back down the hill toward the city center, the silence of the streets is profound. The only sound is the rhythmic click of your shoes on the stone. You think about the packets of powder being opened all across the city, in the grand apartments of the 16th arrondissement and the tiny garrets of the Latin Quarter. The White Fairy has no prejudice. She visits the Duchess and the dockworker alike. You pass a small bakery where the first fires of the day are being lit. The smell of baking bread is warm and honest, a reminder of the world that exists outside the velvet curtains and the jazz melodies. But as the warmth of your own dose begins to fade, replaced by a creeping, hollow chill, you find yourself already thinking about the next time. You think about the man in the dark suit and the silver spoon. You think about the way the music sounded when the world was soft and golden. The sun is not yet up, but the sky is turning a bruised, violet color. You walk faster, trying to outrun the sudden, sharp realization that the fairy is gone, and the world she left behind is far colder than the one you remember. You are no longer just an observer of this history. You are becoming a part of its unfolding, tragic rhythm. The melodies of Montmartre are still ringing in your ears, but they are beginning to sound more like a dirge. You reach your door, your hand shaking slightly as you reach for your key, knowing that the silence of your room is waiting for you, and with it, the first real taste of the price the White Fairy demands for her company. The afternoon sun of Paris does not greet you with warmth when you finally emerge from your room. Instead, it hits you like a physical weight, a bright and intrusive glare that makes you squint against the world. You feel a strange sense of detachment as you walk down the Boulevard du Montparnasse. Your limbs feel light, almost hollow, as if you are walking a few inches above the cobblestones. The city around you is loud and vibrant, filled with the roar of motor cars and the shouting of newspaper vendors. But to you, it feels distant. It is as if you are watching a film with the sound turned low. This is the lingering gift of the white fairy. She has left you with a cold clarity, a feeling that you have seen behind the curtain of reality and found the rest of the world wanting. You make your way toward the intersection of Vavin, where the great cafes of the left bank stand like fortresses of culture. You see the awnings of La Rotonde and Le Dôme stretching out over the sidewalks, shaded sanctuaries for the poets, the painters, and the exiles who have made Paris their home. In the years following the Great War, these places have become more than just cafes. They are the laboratories of the soul. You weave through the crowded tables, catching fragments of a dozen different languages. You hear Russian exiles arguing about the revolution, American writers complaining about the exchange rate, and French surrealists debating the nature of dreams. But today you are looking for something specific. You are looking for the new muse that has begun to whisper in the ears of the avant-garde. You find a table in the back of the terrace, away from the prying eyes of the tourists who come here hoping to catch a glimpse of a famous artist. You sit down, and your hands move instinctively to the edge of the table, gripping the cool wood. You are waiting for your friends, the people who understand the secret language you have only recently begun to speak. When they arrive, they do not look like the starving artists of the previous century. There is a new kind of aesthetic emerging here in the heart of the 1920s. It is a look of elegant exhaustion. You watch as a young painter sits across from you, his clothes expensive but rumpled, his eyes shadowed by dark circles that look almost like bruises. He does not order a heavy meal or a bottle of wine. He orders a black coffee and lights a cigarette with trembling fingers. You notice the way he avoids the direct sunlight. You notice the way he scratches idly at his forearm, a rhythmic, absent-minded motion that you recognize with a sudden jolt of familiarity. He leans in close, his voice a dry rasp. He tells you that the old world is dead. He says that the brush and the pen are no longer enough to capture the fragmented reality of the modern age. To create something truly new, he argues, one must rearrange the very chemistry of the mind. This is the gospel of the new bohemian. For this circle of the avant-garde, heroin is not a vice or a tragedy. It is a tool. It is a way to bypass the boring, logical structures of the brain and reach a state of pure, unadulterated perception. You listen as the conversation turns to the great names of the scene. They speak of Jean Cocteau, the brilliant polymath who has made the pursuit of the artificial paradise into a form of high art. Although Cocteau is often associated with the older, more traditional opium, the younger crowd in his wake has moved toward the sharper, more efficient thrill of heroin. They talk about how the drug strips away the unnecessary layers of the ego. It leaves only the essential. They call it the cold sun. It provides a light that does not burn, a clarity that does not demand action. As you sit there, the cafe around you seems to transform. The clinking of spoons against porcelain saucers becomes a symphony. The blue smoke from the cigarettes drifts in beautiful, impossible patterns. You feel a sense of profound intellectual superiority. You look at the ordinary people walking by on the sidewalk, the shopkeepers and the bank clerks, and you feel a wave of pity for them. They are trapped in the dull, gray grind of the everyday. They will never know the crystalline heights that you have touched. They will never understand that the white fairy is the true patroness of the modern age. But as the hour grows later, the atmosphere begins to shift. The initial rush of intellectual excitement begins to give way to a heavy, sluggish lethargy. The painter across from you stops talking. His head begins to dip toward his chest in a slow, rhythmic motion. His cigarette burns down to the filter, a long column of ash trembling precariously before falling onto his sleeve. He does not notice. This is the nod, the quiet, heavy sleep that claims the user once the initial clarity fades. You feel it too. The world is becoming muffled. The edges of the buildings across the street are beginning to blur. You realize that the conversation has died out, replaced by a heavy, communal silence. This is the secret of the Bohemian high. It is a social ritual that ends in total isolation. You are all sitting together, but you are each locked in your own private, chemical cathedral. There is no more talk of art or revolution. There is only the sensation of your own heartbeat, slow and steady, and the feeling of the blood moving through your veins like liquid lead. You decide to leave the cafe. You need to move to feel the air on your face, though your legs feel heavy and unreliable. You wander toward the studio of a sculptor you know, a man who lives in a converted stable near the edge of the district. When you arrive, the smell hits you immediately. It is a mixture of damp clay, turpentine, and that sharp, vinegary scent that you have come to associate with the White Fairy. The sculptor is at work, but his movements are strange. In the past, he was a man of violent energy, hacking away at stone with a feverish intensity. Now he moves with a terrifying, slow-motion grace. He is stroking the clay as if it were living skin. He tells you that he can hear the stone breathing. He says that the heroin has given him the ability to see the fourth dimension, to see the space between the atoms. You look at his work and you see something that is both beautiful and deeply disturbing. The figures are elongated, their faces twisted into expressions of agonized ecstasy. It is art that feels as though it was made in a vacuum, or at the bottom of a deep, cold ocean. He stops working and looks at you. His pupils are like pinpricks, tiny black dots in the center of pale blue irises. He asks you if you have any. It is a blunt, desperate question that punctures the atmosphere of artistic pretension. In this moment, the mask of the avant-garde muse slips, and you see the raw hunger underneath. He is not looking for inspiration anymore. He is looking for maintenance. He explains that he cannot even pick up his tools without it. The muse has become a taskmaster. She no longer gives her gifts for free. She demands a tribute of every hour and every franc. You realize then that the cafes and the studios are filled with people who are caught in this same trap. They speak of liberation, but they are bound by a chemical chain. They speak of the new age, but they are living in a state of suspended animation. The vibrant, chaotic energy of 1920s Paris is still happening outside the door, but in here, time has stopped. The clocks are still ticking, but they no longer mean anything. You walk back out into the evening air. The blue hour has arrived, that magical time in Paris when the sky turns a deep, electric indigo and the streetlights begin to flicker to life. Ordinarily, this would be the time for dinner, for wine, for the beginning of the night's festivities. But you find that you have no appetite for food. The very thought of it is repulsive. You have no desire for the loud, boisterous company of the dance halls. You find yourself heading back toward your own room, back toward the small wooden box and the glass dropper. You tell yourself that you are going back to work, that you will use the clarity of the drug to write the great poem or the great manifesto that will define your generation. You tell yourself that you are one of the elite, one of the few who can handle the fire without being consumed. But as you walk, you catch your reflection in a shop window. For a second, you do not recognize the person looking back. The face is pale, the cheeks slightly sunken, the eyes wide and staring. You look like a ghost haunting the streets of your own life. You look like one of the figures in the sculptor's studio, caught between the world of the living and the world of the dreams. You turn away from the glass and quicken your pace. The white fairy is calling to you again. She is whispering that the world is too loud, too bright, and too cruel. She is promising you a place where the sun is always cold and the silence is absolute. You tell yourself that this is the price of genius. You tell yourself that to reach the heights of the avant-garde, you must be willing to walk through the shadows. You reach for your key, your mind already far away, already drifting toward that quiet, white horizon where the only thing that matters is the next drop, the next breath, and the next moment of perfect, terrifying peace. You stand on the edge of the Quai du Port in Marseille, and the first thing that hits you is the smell. It is a thick, humid soup of brine, rotting fish, expensive tobacco, and the heavy, sweet scent of roasting coffee. The Mediterranean sun is a white hammer beating down on the limestone paving stones, bleaching the world into high contrast. This is the gateway to France, the ancient port where the East and the West do not just meet, they collide. You look out over the water and see a forest of masts and the black, soot-stained funnels of steamships that have traveled from Istanbul, Beirut, and Alexandria. This is the beginning of the journey. This is where the white powder that is currently haunting the streets of Paris begins its long, silent trek northward. You are not here as a tourist. You are here to see how the gears of the machine turn. To your left, a gang of dockworkers, their chests bare and slick with sweat, are unloading heavy wooden crates from a weathered freighter. The labels claim the crates contain dried figs or perhaps rolls of silk, but if you look closely at the men watching from the shadows of the warehouse eaves, you realize the contents are far more precious. Somewhere in the belly of that ship, tucked into hollowed-out timber or hidden beneath layers of raw wool, are the bricks of raw opium. In 1924, the world is changing. The laws are tightening, and what used to be a legitimate pharmaceutical trade is retreating into the dark. You follow one of these men, a quiet figure in a flat cap and a canvas jacket, as he slips away from the blinding light of the docks and into the labyrinth of the old port. The streets here are narrow, barely wide enough for a donkey cart, and the buildings lean toward one another as if whispering secrets. This is the heart of the milieu, the French underworld. It is a world governed by silence and the Corsican code of honor. You walk past cramped bars where the air is blue with smoke and the sound of accordions drifts out into the heat. In the back rooms of these bistros, the raw product from the Levant is being transformed. You watch through a cracked window as a chemist, a man who perhaps once worked for a respectable lab in Lyon, carefully monitors a bubbling glass flask. The process is messy and dangerous, involving volatile chemicals like acetic anhydride, but the result is a substance far more potent and far more portable than raw opium. It is heroin. In its pure form, it is a gleaming crystalline white. It is the gold of the new age. The men who control this process are not street thugs. They are businessmen who have realized that a single suitcase of this powder is worth more than a fleet of ships carrying grain. Now, you must move the product. The pipeline needs to flow. You find yourself at the Marseille-Saint Charles railway station. The architecture is grand, a monument to the power of the French Empire, with a massive stone staircase that seems to lead straight into the sky. You are carrying a leather valise, the kind an accountant or a mid-level lawyer might carry. Inside, nestled between a change of clothes and a newspaper, are several kilos of the white powder. You feel the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the weight of the risk. If the gendarmes stop you, your life is over. But the demand in Paris is screaming, and the profits are too high to ignore. You board the Paris Lyon Mediterranean Express, the famous PLM. You find your compartment and sit among the velvet upholstery. The train begins to move, pulling away from the shimmering blue of the Mediterranean and heading into the rugged hills of Provence. You watch the olive groves and the vineyards blur past the window. You are part of a hidden network, a circulatory system that feeds the heart of France. For every kilo you carry, there are dozens more moving by car, by mail, or hidden in the luggage of unsuspecting travelers. The authorities are trying to keep up, but they are fighting a ghost. The borders are porous, and the corruption is deep. A few well-placed banknotes in the pocket of a customs official can make a whole shipment vanish. As the sun begins to set over the rolling hills of the Rhone Valley, the train picks up speed. You are moving through the night, a silent courier in a country that is still trying to heal from the wounds of the Great War. For many of the people you will encounter in Paris, the war never really ended. They are looking for an escape, and you are the one bringing it to them. The heroin craze of the 1920s is not just a matter of supply, it is a matter of profound cultural hunger. You are the provider for a generation that wants to forget. The night is long, and the rhythm of the rails is hypnotic. You do not sleep. You cannot afford to. You think about the destination. Paris is not just a city, it is a theater. And the cafés of Montmartre and Montparnasse are the stages where the final act of this journey will play out. By the time the sky begins to turn gray over the suburbs of the capital, you are ready. The train slows as it enters the cavernous iron and glass belly of the Gare de Lyon. The steam hisses from the engine, shrouding the platform in a thick, white fog. You step off the train and blend into the crowd. You walk with purpose but without haste. You pass the ticket barriers, your heart hammering against your ribs as you see a pair of officers standing by the exit. They are looking for pickpockets and vagrants, not a well-dressed man with a leather bag. You walk past them, out into the cool morning air of Paris. The city is waking up. The street cleaners are out, and the smell of fresh bread is beginning to drift from the bakeries. You hail a taxi, a rattling Renault, and give the driver an address in the 9th arrondissement. You are heading toward the grand boulevards, toward the places where the light is brightest. The taxi weaves through the traffic, past the opera house and the luxury hotels. You finally arrive at a small, nondescript cafe on a side street. The awning is faded, and the chairs are stacked on the tables. This is the handoff. You go inside. The air is cold and smells of stale wine and sawdust. A man is sitting at a table in the back, a single cup of espresso in front of him. You do not speak. You sit down, place the valise on the floor between your feet, and wait. After a moment, he slides a newspaper across the table. Tucked inside is an envelope thick with high-denomination francs. You slide the bag toward him with your foot. The transaction is over in seconds. It is a silent, professional exchange that happens dozens of times a day across the city. From this little cafe, the product will be broken down. It will be cut with sugar or flour to increase the volume. It will be folded into small paper packets called please. And then, it will move into the hands of the runners. You see them as you leave the cafe. They are the shadows in the corners of the great dance halls. They are the flower girls who sell more than just roses. They are the waiters who bring a little something extra with the bill. You walk through the streets of Montmartre as the afternoon begins to take hold. You see the artists at their easels and the tourists flocking to the Sacré-Cœur. But you also see the reality of the pipeline. In the doorway of a crumbling apartment building, you see a young woman, her eyes glazed and distant, leaning against the stone. She is waiting for the runner. She is the end point of the long journey that began on the docks of Marseille. The white powder has traveled hundreds of miles, through dozens of hands, and across a landscape of legal and moral boundaries just to reach this moment. The Marseille pipeline is more than just a smuggling route. It is the backbone of an entire shadow economy. It supports the lavish lifestyles of the gang bosses in the south, the corrupt officials in the ministries, and the dealers in the cabarets. It turns the misery of the addicted into the champagne of the elite. And as you walk through the bustling streets of Paris, you realize that the city is addicted to more than just the drug itself. It is addicted to the thrill of the illicit, the danger of the underground, and the frantic, beautiful chaos of a world that has lost its moorings. The cafes are filling up now. The green hour, the time for absinthe, is approaching. But for many, the bitter taste of wormwood is no longer enough. They want the white peace that you brought from the sea. They want the silence that only the needle or the pipe can provide. You look at your hands, and for a moment you can still feel the grit of the Marseille docks. You can still hear the roar of the Mediterranean. The pipeline is open, the flow is steady, and the 1920s are screaming for more. You turn the corner and vanish into the crowd, just another face in a city that is dancing on the edge of a precipice, fueled by a white fire that started in the sun-drenched ports of the south. You have done your part. The machine continues to grind, hidden in plain sight, beneath the glittering surface of the city of light. You step out of the chill of a Parisian autumn night and into the thick, humid embrace of a basement club in Montmartre. The year is 1924, and the city is vibrating with a frequency that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. It is the era of the Great Gatsby, but here in the narrow, winding streets of the right bank, the reality is far more raw and far more dangerous. You feel the floorboards beneath your boots shudder with the steady, driving thump of a double bass. The air is a heavy soup of blue tobacco smoke, expensive French perfume, and the faint, acrid scent of burnt sugar. This is the heartbeat of the jazz age, a rhythm that is frantic, beautiful, and deeply reckless. You find a small table in the corner, half hidden by a structural pillar draped in tattered red velvet. From here, you can see the entire room. The patrons are a chaotic mix of the elite and the excluded. You see wealthy socialites in silk gowns sitting shoulder to shoulder with starving poets and weary dockworkers. In this subterranean world, the rigid social hierarchies of the French Third Republic have dissolved into a puddle of sweat and syncopation. Everyone is chasing something. Some are chasing the new sound of America, the wild and improvisational jazz that has taken Paris by storm. Others, however, are chasing a different kind of release. Look closely at the man sitting 2 tables over. He is dressed in a tuxedo that has seen better days, his bow tie hanging limp around his collar. He is not watching the band. His eyes are fixed on a small, rectangular piece of folded paper resting on the mahogany surface in front of him. With fingers that tremble only slightly, he unfolds the paper to reveal a mound of shimmering white powder. This is what the locals call La Blanche or the White Lady. It is heroin in its purest, most potent form, and in the 1920s, it has become as much a part of the Parisian nightlife as the saxophone. You watch as he leans down, his movements practiced and discreet. With a quick, sharp inhale, the powder vanishes. He leans back, and for a moment his entire body seems to liquefy. The tension leaves his shoulders. The haunted look in his eyes softens into a glassy, distant stare. He is no longer in a crowded, noisy basement. He is floating in a warm, amber sea, far away from the memories of the trenches or the pressures of a changing world. The music continues to blare around him, but he is now perfectly out of sync with it, caught in a slow-motion dream that the rest of the world cannot touch. This is the intersection of rhythm and recklessness. For many in Paris during this decade, jazz and heroin were two sides of the same coin. Both offered an escape from the crushing weight of tradition. Jazz broke the rules of melody and structure, while heroin broke the rules of human sensation. Together, they created a culture of the immediate present. There was no yesterday and certainly no tomorrow. There was only the high and the beat. You see this play out on the stage as well. The musicians, many of them African-American veterans who stayed in France after the Great War to escape the suffocating racism of the United States, are playing with an intensity that borders on the divine. They are the kings of this underworld, celebrated as geniuses in a city that treats them with a dignity they never knew at home. But that freedom comes with a price. The pressure to perform, to remain in that state of creative ecstasy for hours on end, leads many to the little glass vials and the folded papers. You notice the trumpet player wipe his brow with a silk handkerchief. His movements are fluid, almost ghostly. He closes his eyes and hits a high note that seems to hang in the air forever, a silver needle of sound piercing through the roar of the crowd. You wonder if he is playing for the audience or if he is simply trying to stay afloat in the chemical tide rising within him. As you sit there, you begin to realize that the heroin craze of the 1920s was not an accident. It was a symptom of a city trying to forget. The Great War had ended only a few years prior, leaving behind a generation of men with shattered bodies and even more shattered minds. The physical pain was one thing, but the psychic trauma was another entirely. Morphine had been the medicine of the battlefield, but heroin was the medicine of the peace. It was stronger, more portable, and for a long time surprisingly easy to find. You look around the room again and notice a woman in a shimmering flapper dress. She is young, perhaps 21, with a bobbed haircut and dark kohl around her eyes. She is laughing, a bright, brittle sound that cuts through the music. She reaches into her beaded handbag and pulls out a small silver spoon. She doesn't hide what she is doing. In this environment, among the artists and the rebels, there is a strange sort of pride in this recklessness. Using heroin is seen as an act of defiance against the boring, bourgeois values of the older generation. It is a badge of belonging to the lost generation. She catches your eye and offers a conspiratorial wink. To her, this is just another thrill, like driving a motorcar at high speeds or dancing the Charleston until dawn. She does not see the trap that is slowly closing around her. She does not see the way her skin will eventually lose its luster, or how her bright laughter will turn into a hollow cough. All she sees is the glitter of the lights and the way the music feels like a physical touch against her skin. The atmosphere in the club is becoming increasingly feverish. The drummer is lost in a frantic solo, his sticks a blur of motion. The dancers on the floor are moving with a desperate energy, their limbs flailing in a way that looks almost like a seizure. The heat is stifling, and the smell of the drug is now unmistakable. It is a sweet, cloying scent that sticks to the back of your throat. You feel a strange sort of vertigo. It is as if the entire room is tilting, sliding toward an inevitable crash. This was the danger of the era. The recklessness was not just a personal choice, it was a collective mood. Paris was a city that had been pushed to the edge of destruction, and now that it had survived, it wanted to live with a terrifying intensity. But this intensity was unsustainable. The heroine provided a shortcut to transcendence, a way to bypass the slow, painful process of healing and jump straight into a state of artificial grace. You decide to leave before the sun comes up. As you make your way toward the exit, you pass through the kitchen area. There, in the dim light of a single swinging bulb, you see a young waiter slumped against a stack of crates. He is barely conscious, his head lolling to the side. A discarded syringe lies on the floor near his hand. This is the side of the craze that the poets don't write about. It is not glamorous and it is not rebellious. It is simply a slow, quiet death in a dark corner. You push open the heavy doors and step back out onto the street. The air is cold and crisp, a shocking contrast to the stifling heat of the club. The sky is beginning to turn a pale, bruised purple as dawn approaches. The sounds of the jazz band are muffled now, a distant heartbeat echoing through the stone walls of the buildings. You walk down the hill toward the Seine, passing other revelers who are stumbling home in the early light. You realize that you have just witnessed a moment in time where the world was suspended between two catastrophes. The memory of the First War was fading into a drug-induced fog, and the shadow of the second had not yet begun to fall. In this brief, shimmering window, Paris chose to dance and to dream, regardless of the cost. The rhythm was infectious, and the recklessness was a form of armor. But as you watch the first light of morning hit the white domes of the Sacré-Cœur, you can't help but feel a sense of profound sadness. The music will eventually stop, the high will inevitably fade, and the city will have to wake up to the cold, gray reality of what it has become. You continue your walk, the rhythm of your own footsteps now the only sound in the quiet street. You pass an alleyway where a group of men are huddled together, their faces obscured by the shadows. You don't need to see them to know what they are doing. The exchange is quick, a flash of silver or paper, and then they disperse like ghosts. The heroin trade is the invisible infrastructure of this golden age, the dark current that pulls beneath the sparkling surface. Every beautiful melody you heard tonight, every elegant dress you saw, every witty conversation you overheard, was touched by this shadow. The jazz age was not just about the music. It was about the desperate need to feel something, anything, other than the lingering ache of the past. And for many, the only thing loud enough to drown out that ache was the frantic beat of the drums and the silent, deadly rush of the white powder. You turn the corner and head toward the river, leaving the echoes of the underground behind you, but the feeling of that reckless rhythm stays with you, a haunting reminder of a generation that tried to outrun its own shadow in the city of light. You walk away from the riverbank, leaving the damp mist of the Seine behind. Your leather shoes click on the polished cobblestones of the right bank, where the air feels different. It is thinner, colder, and heavy with the scent of coal smoke mixed with expensive perfumes. You are moving toward the 8th arrondissement, the heart of Parisian prestige. Here, the streetlights do not just illuminate the path. They glow with a certain prestigious warmth, reflecting off the grand limestone facades of Haussmann buildings that stand like stone sentinels of the old world. You pass the heavy, black wrought iron gates of private mansions, behind which lies a world of unimaginable wealth and carefully guarded secrets. In the lower quarters of the city, the drug craze is a visible scar, a frantic rhythm of the streets and the jazz clubs. But here, in the upper crust enclaves, the heroin habit is something else entirely. It is elegant. It is quiet. It is a hidden accessory, as much a part of the evening wardrobe as a string of pearls or a silk pocket square. You stop before a massive oak door, carved with the crest of a family that likely dates back to the days of the monarchy. You pull the heavy brass bell handle. The sound echoes deep within the house, and a moment later, a butler in a stiff white collar pulls the door open. He does not ask for your name. He simply bows and gestures for you to enter the marble foyer. As you step inside, the roar of the 1920s fades into a velvet silence. The floor is a chessboard of black and white stone, polished to a mirror finish. You are handed a glass of crystal-clear gin, but you notice that your host and the guests gathered in the drawing room are not interested in the alcohol. They are slumped into deep, brocade armchairs, their bodies draped in the latest fashions from the houses of Chanel and Patou. The room smells of lilies and expensive tobacco, but underneath it all, there is a sharp, medicinal tang that lingers in the back of your throat. You see a woman across the room, a countess whose face has graced the society pages for a decade. She is young, barely 25, but her eyes have a distant, glassy quality. She holds a small silver spoon, the kind used for salt or spices, but she is not seasoning her food. On the mahogany side table next to her sits a delicate porcelain jar, the sort of thing you might expect to hold expensive face cream. Instead, it is filled with a fine, glittering white powder. With a steady hand and a practiced grace, she lifts the spoon to her nose. This is the ritual of the high society habit. It is not the desperate, hurried act of the addict in the alleyway. It is a slow, deliberate performance of the elite. In these grand salons, heroin is known by many names. They call it the white snow or the powder of the stars. To the wealthy inhabitants of these enclaves, it is not seen as a vice of the weak. It is viewed as a remedy for the soul, a cure for the crushing boredom of a life with too much money and too little purpose. You listen as the guests talk in low, melodic tones. They do not speak of the war or the rising costs of bread. They speak of the sublime numbness the drug provides. They call it a spiritual experience, a way to transcend the physical world and enter a realm of pure, unadulterated sensation. You realize that for the upper class, the heroin craze is a reaction to the vacuum left by the Great War. These are the children of the aristocracy and the titans of industry who watched the old world burn. They have the money to buy anything, but they have no faith in the future. To them, the drug is a shield. It protects them from the reality of a changing world where their titles and their fortunes might soon mean nothing. In this room, surrounded by gold leaf and oil paintings of ancestors, the drug feels like a birthright. The supply chain for these enclaves is as discreet as the users themselves. You wouldn't find these people wandering into the dark corners of Montmartre to find a dealer. They have their own connections. You learn of the fashionable chemists located just off the Place Vendôme, where a discreet nod and a heavy payment in gold can secure a vial of the highest quality pharmaceutical-grade heroin. These pharmacists are not back-alley criminals. They are men of standing who provide a service to their most valued clients. They package the drug in beautiful bottles, sometimes labeling it as a sedative or a tonic for the nerves to avoid any unwanted attention from the authorities. There are also the private doctors, the men who make house calls in the middle of the night. You imagine a black carriage or a sleek Bugatti pulling up to these mansions, a doctor stepping out with a leather bag filled with vials. To the outside world, he is treating a case of the vapors or a bout of insomnia. In reality, he is the lifeline for an entire generation of addicted socialites. These doctors are paid handsomely to keep their mouths shut and their prescriptions flowing. It is a closed loop of privilege that keeps the habit hidden from the public eye. As you move through the room, you see a famous poet leaning against the fireplace. He is a man known for his brilliant mind and his sharp wit, but tonight he is a shadow of himself. His skin has a yellowish hue, a common sign of the heavy user, and his hands tremble slightly as he lights a cigarette. He tells you that the drug allows him to see the world in its true form, stripped of the messy emotions of the common man. But as you look closer, you see the cost of this vision. His expensive suit hangs loosely on his frame. He has forgotten to eat for days, replaced by the artificial fullness of the white powder. This is the tragedy of the upper crust enclaves. Behind the velvet curtains and the closed doors, the elite are rotting from the inside out. They have the resources to hide their addiction, to mask the physical decay with makeup and fine clothes, but the rot is there nonetheless. You hear stories of grand estates being sold off bit by bit to pay for the mounting debts to the chemists. You hear of young heirs who disappear from society, only for the rumors to whisper that they have been sent to private sanitariums in the mountains to dry out. But for every one who leaves, 2 more take their place. The allure of the drug is too strong, and the social pressure to be part of the inner circle is even stronger. In these rooms, if you do not partake, you are an outsider. You are a reminder of the reality they are all trying so hard to forget. To be part of the high society in 1920s Paris is to be part of the craze. It is a shared secret, a bond of silence that unites the bankers, the artists, and the aristocrats. You walk toward the large floor-to-ceiling windows and pull back the heavy silk curtain just an inch. Outside, the city of Paris is a sea of lights. Down there, the police might be raiding a jazz club or arresting a petty thief for possession. But up here, the law does not seem to reach. The high stone walls and the prestige of the names on the doorbells act as a barrier. The authorities are often in the pockets of these very people, or perhaps they are guests at the same parties. The hypocrisy of the era is as thick as the incense burning in the corner of the room. You turn back to the drawing room, watching as the light of the crystal chandelier catches the fine dust in the air. It looks like the drug itself, a shimmering, pervasive presence that has settled over everything. You see a young couple whispering in the corner. They look like the picture of health and beauty, the golden children of the Republic. But then you see the man reach into his pocket and pull out a small gold tin. He opens it to reveal the familiar white crystals. He offers some to the woman, and she accepts it with a smile that doesn't reach her eyes. The conversation in the room begins to slow down as the drug takes its full effect. The sharp wit and the laughter are replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. This is the ultimate end of the high society habit. It is not a party. It is a collective withdrawal from the world. They are all together in this room, but they are each utterly alone, trapped in the private paradise of their own minds. They have used their wealth to build a prison of silk and stone, and they have used the heroin to lock the door from the inside. You realize that this hidden habit is perhaps more dangerous than the one on the streets. On the streets, the danger is known. It is visceral. It is a matter of survival. But here, the danger is disguised as luxury. It is a slow poison that saps the energy and the will of the people who are supposed to be the leaders of the nation. As you prepare to leave, you look one last time at the Countess. She has fallen asleep in her chair, her head tilted back, her pearls gleaming in the low light. She looks like a statue, beautiful and cold and entirely hollow. You walk back through the marble foyer, the butler opening the door for you with the same silent efficiency as before. You step back out onto the street, the cold night air hitting your face like a slap. The 8th arrondissement is quiet, the grand mansions standing dark and imposing against the sky. You know now that the city of light has a shadow that stretches even into its most gilded corners. The heroin craze isn't just a fever of the poor or the rebellious. It is a sickness that has reached the very top, a quiet, expensive epidemic that is slowly draining the life out of the Parisian elite, one silver spoon at a time. You walk down the quiet street, the silence of the mansions following you like a ghost. You step off the wet pavement of the boulevard and into the warm, sterile air of a neighborhood pharmacy. The transition is jarring. Outside, the city of Paris is a chaotic swirl of jazz, exhaust fumes, and the lingering scent of roasting chestnuts. Inside this sanctuary of health, the world is hushed. Your boots click softly on the white hexagonal floor tiles. The air is thick with a sharp, medicinal bouquet that pricks the back of your throat, a mixture of dried lavender, ether, rubbing alcohol, and something earthy, like crushed roots. Behind the long, polished mahogany counter, a man in a crisp white coat stands perfectly still. He is the pharmacist, a figure of absolute authority in the neighborhood. He represents science, safety, and the law. To your left and right, floor-to-ceiling shelves are packed with thousands of amber glass bottles. Their gold leaf labels glint in the soft electric light, bearing names in Latin that sound like incantations. You see the gleaming brass scales used to measure out life-saving powders, and the heavy marble mortars where pestles have ground down chemicals for decades. This is a place of precision and trust. At least that is what the public sees. But as you linger near the display of scented soaps and expensive perfumes, you notice something that feels out of step with this professional atmosphere. A side door, tucked behind the main counter, swings open just a fraction. You catch a glimpse of the back room, a space normally reserved for the messy work of compounding medicines. There, the lighting is harsher, and the orderly rows of bottles give way to stacks of plain wooden crates. These crates have not come from a small local laboratory. They bear the markings of major industrial chemical plants from the outskirts of the city and even from across the border in Germany. You watch as a young man, dressed in a suit that is slightly too sharp for a simple trip to the chemist, approaches the counter. He does not ask for cough syrup or a bandage. He doesn't even speak. He simply slides a small slip of paper across the wood. The pharmacist takes it, glances at it for only a second, and then turns his back. He doesn't go to the shelves of common medicines. Instead, he reaches for a small, locked cabinet behind him. From within, he retrieves a tiny cardboard box, no bigger than a matchbox. There is no label on it, no instructions on how many drops to take or when to call the doctor. Money changes hands quickly, a stack of bills that seems far too large for such a small package. The young man tucks the box into his pocket and disappears back out into the Parisian night. What you have just witnessed is the heartbeat of the great pharmacy scandal. While the police are busy chasing street peddlers in the dark alleys of Montmartre, the real volume of the heroin trade is flowing through the front doors of the city's most respectable establishments. This is the diversion of the legal flow, a systemic corruption that turned the very institutions meant to protect public health into the primary suppliers of a national addiction. You have to understand that during this era, the line between medicine and narcotic was incredibly thin. Heroin was still legally manufactured by some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. It was a legitimate product used to treat everything from chronic pain to the persistent coughs of tuberculosis. But the laws passed in 1916 were supposed to have clamped down on its distribution. To get the drug, a patient needed a valid prescription from a licensed physician, and the pharmacist was required to record every gram sold in a special ledger known as the Book of Poisons. However, the system had a fatal flaw. It relied entirely on the integrity of the men in the white coats. You look around the shop again, imagining the ledger sitting on the desk in the back. In theory, that book should tell the story of a city being healed. In reality, in hundreds of pharmacies across Paris, those books are being filled with fiction. You begin to realize the sheer scale of the deception. It starts with the doctors. Not all of them, of course, but a significant number of struggling physicians have discovered that their signatures are worth more than their medical advice. These are the men who write the convenience prescriptions. You can imagine them sitting in their dim offices, signing their names to blank pads for a fee. Or perhaps they invent patients entirely, creating a phantom population of sick Parisians who all happen to need large quantities of heroin every single week. The pharmacist is the second link in this chain. He accepts these prescriptions, knowing full well they are fraudulent. Why would a man of science risk his reputation and his license? The answer is simple and old. It is the profit margin. A pharmacist might make a few centimes on a bottle of aspirin or a tin of lozenges. But heroin, diverted to the black market, offers a return that is almost unimaginable. By selling a portion of his legal stock under the counter at inflated prices, a neighborhood chemist can earn more in a single night than he could in a month of legitimate business. But the scandal goes even deeper than simple greed. As you walk toward the back of the store, pretending to examine a row of decorative porcelain jars, you see the true genius of the diversion. The pharmacists have learned how to play with the numbers. They order 10 times the amount of heroin they could possibly need for their legitimate patients. They report the excess as lost, damaged, or stolen. Sometimes they simply don't report it at all, betting that the overworked inspectors of the Bureau of Narcotics will never have the time or the manpower to count every single vial in every single pharmacy in the city. The result is a massive, invisible leak. The legal supply of heroin is like a great river flowing from the factories. The pharmacists are the dams, meant to control that flow and direct it only to those in need. Instead, they have opened the sluice gates. The drug is pouring out of the back rooms into the hands of middlemen, who then distribute it to the cafes, the jazz clubs, and the private mansions you saw earlier. This is what makes the 1920s heroin craze so difficult for the authorities to stop. How do you declare war on a substance that is being sold by the man who lived next door? How do you raid a business that has been a pillar of the community for 50 years? The police are trained to look for criminals in the shadows, for men with scars and shifty eyes. They are not prepared for the criminal who wears a tie and spends his Sundays at church. You walk toward the door, your hand resting on the cool brass handle. You look back one last time at the pharmacist. He is now helping an elderly woman find a tonic for her nerves. He is patient, kind, and professional. He looks like the very image of reliability. But you know now that his hands are the ones fueling the fire consuming the city. He is part of a silent network of hundreds of professionals who have decided that the health of Paris is a fair price to pay for a life of luxury. As you step back out onto the street, the cold air hits you, and you realize that the scandal isn't just about the drugs themselves. It is about the collapse of a social contract. The pharmacy was supposed to be a place where the truth was dispensed in carefully measured doses. Instead, it has become a hall of mirrors, where the labels on the bottles stay the same, but the contents have become a poison that is slowly rotting the heart of the city. The legal flow has been diverted, and the consequences are visible in the eyes of the people you pass on the sidewalk. You see a woman leaning against a lamp post, her face pale, her gaze unfocused. She likely didn't buy her dose from a dealer in a dark alley. She might have gotten it from a man just like the one you left behind, in a shop that smells of lavender and ether, with a receipt and a polite thank you. The pharmacy scandal has turned the medicine cabinet into a gateway to a nightmare, and as you walk away, you can hear the sound of the city continuing its frantic, drug-fueled dance, unaware that the very people meant to save them are the ones leading the music. You step off the bridge and onto the wet pavement of the Isle de la Cite. Behind you, the Seine flows like a ribbon of black ink, reflecting the distorted yellow glows of the street lamps. The air is cold, biting through your coat, carrying the scent of damp stone and the metallic tang of the river. You are walking toward a fortress of authority, a place where the shadows of the city are documented, categorized, and hunted. This is 36 Quai d'Orfèvres, the legendary headquarters of the Paris police. You push open the heavy doors, and the sound of the city is swallowed by the echo of stone corridors. The atmosphere changes instantly. It is the smell of stale tobacco smoke, wet wool, and the sharp vinegar scent of chemical reagents. You are here to see the men who have been tasked with the impossible, the newly formed Brigade de Stupéfiants. Up a narrow flight of stairs, tucked away from the more prestigious homicide and robbery divisions, you find the small, cramped offices of the narcotics squad. It is a world of paper and frustration. Desks are buried under mountains of dossiers, and the walls are covered in maps of the city, pinned with red markers that look like drops of blood. These markers do not represent murders, at least not directly. They represent the invisible nodes of a trade that is eating Paris from the inside out. You see a man hunched over a desk, his eyes bloodshot from staring at ledger books seized from a raided warehouse. This is the front line of a new kind of war, a war against a substance that leaves no traces, no loud gunshots, and no obvious victims until it is far too late. The Brigade de Stupéfiants was born out of necessity during the Great War, specifically in 1916, when the government realized that morphine and cocaine were rotting the morale of the troops and the civilians alike. But now, in the mid-1920s, the enemy has evolved. Heroin has arrived, and it is a ghost. You watch as a detective pulls a small, glassine envelope from a drawer. He holds it up to the light. Inside is a fine, crystalline powder that looks like nothing more than harmless sugar or salt. That is the problem, he tells you, his voice weary. You can hide 10,000 doses in a gentleman's suitcase. You can hide 100 doses in a woman's garter. How do you police the unseen? You follow the detectives as they prepare for a night shift. There is no fanfare here, no shiny badges or polished boots. To catch the dealers of the white powder, you have to look like the people who buy it. You watch them pull on worn caps, smudge their faces with a bit of soot, and turn their collars up to hide their identities. They are becoming part of the shadows they intend to haunt. As you walk out with them, back into the chilly Parisian night, you realize that the city you saw earlier, the city of jazz and glittering diamonds, is just a thin veil. Beneath it lies a labyrinth of alleys and backrooms where the brigade must play a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The detectives lead you toward Montmartre, but they stay away from the main boulevards. You find yourself in the Goutte or district, a place where the narrow streets feel like they are leaning in to whisper secrets. The air here is different. It is thick with the smell of cheap frying oil, coal dust, and the underlying rot of overcrowded tenements. Your guides move with a practiced silence. They are looking for the mouchards, the police informants who live in the cracks of society. These are the people who have traded their information for a few francs or a shorter sentence. You watch as a detective ducks into a doorway to meet a shadow. There is a hurried exchange of whispers. A hand passes over a crumpled note, and then the shadow vanishes. Information is the only currency that matters in this war. The brigade knows they cannot be everywhere at once. They have to rely on this network of broken people to tell them where the next shipment is arriving. Is it coming by rail from the chemical factories in Germany? Is it hidden in the hold of a merchant ship docking at Marseille and then smuggled north by car? The scale of the trade is staggering. You hear the detectives discussing a recent bust where they found heroin hidden inside hollowed-out loaves of bread. Another time, it was sewn into the linings of expensive fur coats. The creativity of the traffickers is matched only by the desperation of the users. As you walk, you realize that the brigade is fighting more than just criminals. They are fighting a legal system that was never designed for this. The law of 1916 gave them teeth, but those teeth are often blunt. A dealer caught with a significant amount of heroin might only face a few months in prison and a fine that he can pay with a single afternoon of sales. The detectives express their frustration to you. They tell you that they arrest the same men over and over again. It is a revolving door. You see the bitterness in their eyes as they watch a well-dressed man step out of a taxi and disappear into a private club. They know he is a major distributor, but he is protected by wealth and influence. He is a ghost they cannot touch. The night deepens, and the cold begins to seep into your bones. You are led to a small, nondescript apartment building. This is a suspected fumoir, a place where people gather to consume their poison in peace. The detectives signal for silence. You stand in the hallway, the air smelling of damp plaster and old cooking. One of the men produces a heavy iron bar, while the others draw their revolvers. With a sudden, violent crash, the door is splintered open. You follow them inside, your heart hammering against your ribs. The room is small and stiflingly hot. It is filled with a thick, sweetish haze that catches in your throat. You see figures reclining on low divans and floor mats. There is no music here, only the sound of ragged breathing and the clinking of glass. As the police flash their lanterns around the room, you see the faces of the caught. They are not the monsters you might have expected. They are young women in silk slips, older men in tattered suits, and even a few who look like they belong in a university classroom. They blink against the light, their eyes dilated, their expressions vacant. They are not angry or even truly afraid. They are simply elsewhere. The detectives move with clinical efficiency. They are not here to comfort the addicts. They are here for the evidence. You watch them flip over mattresses and smash open floorboards. They find the kits, the small tin boxes containing silver spoons, spirit lamps, and the dreaded needles. They find the stash, several large bags of heroin hidden inside a porcelain doll. The owner of the apartment, a woman with gray hair and a trembling voice, is handcuffed. She cries out that she is just trying to help her friends, that they have nowhere else to go. The detectives ignore her. To them, she is a merchant of death. As the suspects are led away into the waiting police vans, you stay behind for a moment in the rec room. The silence that follows the raid is even more unsettling than the noise. You look at a discarded needle lying on the floor, reflecting the moonlight. This is what the Brigade des Stupéfiants sees every night. They are the ones who have to pull back the curtain and look at the wreckage. They see the bodies in the morgue that no one claims. They see the families destroyed by a single white powder. They are the thin line between the city and the void, but even they are starting to feel the weight of the darkness. Back at Quai d'Orfèvres, the sun is beginning to peek over the horizon, casting a pale, gray light over the Seine. The detectives return to their desks, their faces lined with exhaustion. They begin the long process of writing their reports, filling out the forms that will eventually be filed away and forgotten. One of them looks at you and shrugs. He tells you that for every room they close, 3 more open up. For every kilo they seize, 10 more make it to the streets. It is a tide that refuses to recede. You realize that the brigade is not just policing a crime. They are policing a symptom of a much deeper malady. The 1920s are a time of frantic joy, but that joy is often a mask for a profound sense of loss and disillusionment left over from the war. Heroin offers a way to stop feeling, a way to escape the memories that haunt the survivors. The police can arrest the dealers and seize the drugs, but they cannot fix the broken hearts of the people who seek them out. As you prepare to leave the headquarters, you look one last time at the maps on the wall. The red markers seem to have multiplied in the night. The city is waking up, the cafes are opening their doors, and the first workers are heading to the metro. But you know that in the shadows, the trade is already beginning again. The Brigade de Stupéfiants will be there to meet it, but they are tired, and the unseen enemy is only getting stronger. You walk back out into the cool morning air, the sound of your own footsteps echoing against the ancient stones, knowing that the battle for the soul of Paris is far from over. You find yourself standing on a narrow, winding street in the heart of Montmartre. The year is 1923, and the air is thick with the scent of coal smoke, roasted coffee, and the faint, sweet decay of the city. The sun is setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the cobblestones, and the gas lamps are beginning to flicker to life. You are not here for the art or the music, though both surround you. You are here because you have noticed a change in the atmosphere of the cafes and the backrooms. There is a new rhythm to the city, a faster pulse that conceals a deeper, more hollow ache. For years, the people you have watched in these dim corners were satisfied with morphine. It was the elegant vice of the 19th century, a relic of the grand salons and the weary soldiers of the Franco-Prussian War. But something has shifted. Morphine is no longer enough. You are witnessing the birth of a new era, the moment when the refined habit of the past collapses into the desperate hunger of the future. You are watching the transition to heroin. You walk toward a small establishment tucked away behind a laundry shop. As you push open the heavy wooden door, the heat of the room hits you. It is crowded with people from every walk of life. You see a wealthy woman in a silk dress sitting next to a man whose jacket is frayed at the cuffs and stained with grease. They are bound together by a shared urgency. In the center of the table sits a small glass vial and a delicate silver needle. For decades, morphine was the gold standard for those seeking an escape from the physical and emotional scars of life. It was a chemical embrace that felt like a warm bath, a slow dissolving of the world. But as you watch the man reach for the vial, you notice his hands are shaking with a different kind of intensity. He is not looking for the slow drift of morphine anymore. He is looking for the strike of the dragon. To understand why this change is happening, you have to look back at the bottles lining the shelves of the pharmacies you passed on your way here. You remember the advertisements from only 20 years ago. In 1898, a German chemical company called Bayer released a new product. They called it heroin, a name derived from the German word heroisch, meaning heroic. It was marketed as a miracle cure, a non-addictive substitute for morphine and a powerful suppressant for the coughs that plagued the damp, crowded cities of Europe. It was sold in elegant bottles, recommended for children and the elderly alike. You recall seeing it in catalogs alongside aspirin, a twin remedy for the modern age. For a time, the medical world truly believed they had found a way to harness the power of the poppy without its teeth. They thought they had created a version of morphine that could heal without enslaving. They were wrong. You take a seat in the corner of the room, observing the ritual. The man at the table does not take a long time to prepare his dose. That is one of the primary draws of this new substance. It is more potent, more concentrated, and more efficient. While a morphine user might need a significant amount of the drug to achieve a state of bliss, heroin requires only a fraction of that. You watch as he dissolves the white powder. It is a clean, clinical process that belies the chaos it creates in the blood. When the drug enters his system, you see the transformation immediately. It is not the slow, heavy drooping of the eyelids you associated with the old morphine addicts. This is a sharp, electric surge. It is a rush that hits the brain with the force of a locomotive, a sudden explosion of euphoria that makes the world outside these walls seem like a dull, distant memory. You realize that the transition from morphine to heroin in Paris was not just a matter of availability, but a response to the trauma of the Great War. You look around the room and see men who likely stood in the mud of Verdun or the Somme. They returned to a city that wanted to dance and forget, but their nerves were shattered. Morphine offered a way to numb the pain, but heroin offered a way to feel invincible. In the aftermath of the most industrial, soul-crushing conflict in human history, the French public was looking for a heroic escape. The drug promised them exactly that. It promised to make them feel like the heroes the propaganda said they were, even as it quietly began to hollow them out from the inside. You step back out into the street, the cool air a sharp contrast to the stifling heat of the den. You begin to walk toward the Seine, thinking about the geography of this transition. In the old days, morphine was often a private affair, something managed by a sympathetic doctor or a discreet pharmacist. But heroin has changed the map of the city. Because it is so much more potent and easier to transport, it has given rise to a new kind of shadow economy. You pass a pharmacy where the windows are reinforced with iron bars. The pharmacists are nervous. They are the front line of this transition. In the early 20s, the laws are still catching up to the reality of the streets. You can still find pharmacies that will sell you what you need if you have the right look or the right amount of money. But the black market is growing. The white powder is being smuggled in from laboratories in the East, hidden in the luggage of travelers and the crates of merchant ships. As you walk, you notice the way the city itself seems to be changing to accommodate the drug. The grand boulevards are still there, but there is a new frantic energy in the shadows. You see a group of young bohemians sitting outside a cafe, their eyes bright and their speech rapid. They are part of the lost generation, the artists and writers who have flocked to Paris to find meaning in a world that seems to have lost its mind. For them, heroin is not just a medicine or a numbing agent. It is a tool for exploration. They believe it can unlock new levels of creativity, that it can pull back the veil of reality. You hear them talking about the thrill of the chase, the way the drug makes colors more vivid and music more profound. They are chasing the dragon, a phrase that will eventually become synonymous with the pursuit of that first, unattainable high. You reach the banks of the river and lean against the stone wall, watching the dark water flow by. You think about the biological trap that has been set for these people. The transition from morphine to heroin is a one-way street. Because heroin is converted into morphine once it crosses the blood-brain barrier, but does so with such speed and intensity, it rewires the brain's chemistry in a way that its predecessor never did. The body quickly adjusts to this new, extreme level of stimulation. You have seen what happens when the drug wears off. The descent is not a gentle return to reality. It is a violent crash into a world that feels cold, gray, and agonizingly loud. The muscles ache, the bones feel as though they are made of glass, and the mind becomes obsessed with a single goal: finding the next dose. You see a figure huddled under the arches of a nearby bridge. It is a man you might have mistaken for a beggar, but as you get closer, you see the remnants of a fine wool coat. He is a casualty of the transition. He started with morphine for a wound sustained in the war, but when the doctors cut off his supply, he turned to the streets. He found that the heroin was cheaper and easier to find. But the potency that once made it attractive has now become his prison. He is no longer chasing a feeling of heroism. He is simply trying to feel human again. The heroic drug has turned him into a ghost. The transition you are witnessing is also a social one. You remember how morphine was once associated with the decadent upper classes, the bored aristocrats who used it to pass the time. But heroin has democratized the addiction. It has moved from the salons to the factories, from the opera houses to the tenements. It is a drug for the masses, a cheap ticket out of a difficult life. This shift is what is finally starting to catch the attention of the authorities. As long as the addiction was confined to the wealthy, the state could turn a blind eye. But now that it is spreading through the heart of the Parisian working class, the tone of the conversation is changing. You see posters on the walls warning of the white plague, a new term for the heroin epidemic that is sweeping through the city. You turn away from the river and head back toward the lights of the city center. The transition is almost complete. Morphine will always exist, but it has been relegated to the hospital ward and the hospice. Heroin is the new king of the Parisian underworld. It is the drug of the jazz age, the fuel for the long nights and the desperate mornings. You realize that the city you knew, the city of slow elegance and measured vices, is gone. In its place is a city that is moving too fast, driven by a chemical hunger that it does not yet understand. You feel the weight of this knowledge as you walk through the crowded streets. You see the faces of the people passing by, and you wonder how many of them are already caught in the dragon's grip. The transition from morphine to heroin was not just a change in a chemical formula. It was a change in the soul of Paris, a descent into a deeper, darker kind of craving that will haunt the city for decades to come. You continue your walk, the sounds of the night closing in around you, knowing that the chase has only just begun. You leave the damp, narrow streets of Montmartre behind, and as you do, the heavy, perfumed air of the Parisian jazz clubs begins to fade. You find yourself traveling east, away from the chaos of the city of light and toward the crisp, biting air of the Swiss Alps. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks serves as a bridge between two very different worlds. You are moving from the place where the drug is consumed to the place where the laws are written. You arrive in Geneva, a city of mirrors and still water, where the surface of Lake Geneva reflects a sky so clear it makes the grime of the Parisian underworld feel like a bad dream. Here, in this quiet, orderly landscape, the fate of the heroin trade is being decided by men who have never stepped foot in a Rue de Lap den. You walk through the grand, echoing halls of the Palais Wilson. This is the temporary headquarters of the League of Nations, an organization born from the ashes of the Great War with the impossible task of keeping the world from tearing itself apart again. You feel the weight of the high ceilings and the chill of the marble floors beneath your feet. The atmosphere here is one of desperate, hushed urgency. It is a world of ink, parchment, and endless committees. You see men in stiff collars and three-piece suits carrying leather portfolios stuffed with reports from every corner of the globe. They are not talking about the war between nations today. They are talking about a different kind of invasion, They are talking about the white powder that has slipped through the borders of Europe like a ghost. You find your way into a large committee room where the Opium Advisory Committee is in session. The air here does not smell of opium smoke or chemical fumes. It smells of expensive tobacco and old paper. You take a seat in the back, watching the delegates from Britain, the United States, France, and Japan huddle around a massive oak table. These are the men who have realized that the heroin craze in cities like Paris is not just a local scandal. It is a global epidemic. For the first time in history, you are witnessing the birth of international drug control. Before this moment, if you wanted to buy or sell heroin in France, the laws were a confusing patchwork of old decrees and half-hearted regulations. But these men in Geneva are looking at the numbers, and the numbers are terrifying. You look over the shoulder of a young clerk and see the data they are analyzing. The world is producing 10 times, perhaps 20 times, the amount of morphine and heroin that is actually needed for medical purposes. The factories in the suburbs of Paris, the laboratories in London, and the chemical giants in Germany are churning out tons of the stuff every year. They claim it is for hospitals and pharmacies, but the delegates know the truth. They know that the surplus is being diverted. It is flowing out of the factory gates and into the pockets of middlemen who whisk it away to the dark corners of the world where you just were. You listen as the American representative speaks with a sharp, moralizing tone. He is pushing for a total ban, a complete strangulation of production. He sees the drug as a plague that must be eradicated at the source. But then you hear the French delegate clear his throat. He is in a difficult position. France is home to some of the most powerful pharmaceutical companies in the world. For the French government, these factories are a source of pride and national revenue. They do not want to shut down their industry just because some bohemians in Paris cannot handle their habits. You feel the tension in the room, the tug of war between morality and money. As you sit there, you realize that the League of Nations is trying to build a cage for a beast that has already escaped. They are debating the Geneva Convention of 1925. You watch as they argue over a new system of import and export certificates. This is the heart of the crackdown. The idea is simple but revolutionary. From now on, no shipment of heroin or morphine can leave a country without a government permit, and it cannot enter another country without a corresponding permit from that government. You see the pens scratching across the paper as they draft these rules. They are trying to create a paper trail for every single gram of the drug. They want to turn the invisible trade into a visible one. But you know something these diplomats do not seem to fully grasp yet. You have seen the ingenuity of the traffickers. You know that as soon as a law is written, a way around it is born. The diplomats believe that by controlling the legitimate factories, they will starve the black market. They do not realize that they are actually creating the black market as we know it today. By tightening the noose around the legal pharmaceutical trade, they are making the drug more valuable. They are turning heroin into white gold. You follow the delegates into the hallway during a break. You hear them whispering about the latest reports from the French police. The authorities in Paris have finally felt the pressure from Geneva. For years, the French police looked the other way, viewing drug use as a vice of the elite or a tragedy for the poor that did not concern the state. But now, with the world watching, they are forced to act. You learn that new laws are being pushed through the French Chamber of Deputies. The penalties for selling are being increased. The police are forming specialized squads to hunt down the wholesalers. The era of the open shop, where you could almost buy heroin over the counter in certain districts, is coming to an end. You imagine the ripples this crackdown is sending back to the streets you just walked. You see the pharmacists in Paris suddenly becoming nervous, locking their cabinets and double-checking their ledgers. You see the doctors who used to write prescriptions for a fee suddenly turning their patients away, terrified of a surprise inspection. The supply is beginning to dry up, but the demand is not. The people you saw in the shadows, the ones with the hollow eyes and the trembling hands, they still need their fix. The League of Nations crackdown is like a giant hand pressing down on a balloon. When they squeeze the legal production in Geneva, the pressure just moves elsewhere. You hear the delegates discussing the rise of clandestine laboratories. This is a new development. If the big factories in Paris and Germany are forced to stop their surplus production, the criminals will simply build their own hidden factories. You hear rumors of secret labs being set up in the hills of Turkey and the back alleys of Marseille. The crackdown in Geneva is not ending the heroin craze. It is professionalizing it. It is taking the trade out of the hands of chemists and putting it into the hands of gangsters. You walk out of the Palais Wilson and back toward the lake. The sun is setting, casting a long, golden light over the water. It is a beautiful, peaceful scene, but you feel a sense of dread. These men in Geneva think they are solving a problem with their certificates and their committees. They believe in the power of the state to regulate human desire. But as you look back at the grand building, you realize that the crackdown is actually the beginning of a much larger war. By making the drug illegal and hard to find, they have ensured that only the most ruthless and organized criminals will survive in the trade. You think about the shift in the atmosphere of Paris that is about to occur. The age of the amateur dealer, the waiter who sold a few packets on the side, is over. The age of the international syndicate is beginning. The price of heroin on the street will skyrocket. The quality will drop as dealers cut the powder with sugar or chalk to make it last longer. The violence will increase as rival gangs fight over the dwindling supply. The intervention from Geneva has changed the game forever. The heroin craze of the 1920s is no longer just a scandalous fad of the Jazz Age. It has become a matter of national security, a bureaucratic battleground, and a gold mine for the underworld. You board the train to head back to France, but you know that the Paris you return to will be different. The carefree days of the early 20s are gone. The shadow of the law has grown long, and in that shadow, something much more dangerous is starting to grow. You settle into your seat, watching the Swiss mountains disappear into the twilight, knowing that the crackdown has not stopped the chase. It has only raised the stakes. The world has declared war on a powder, and you are about to see just how high the body count will rise. The sound of the train seems to echo the scratching of the pens in the meeting hall, a relentless, mechanical rhythm that signals the end of one era and the dark beginning of another. You close your eyes, the image of the white powder and the white marble of Geneva blurred together in your mind, two sides of a coin that is about to be tossed into the air. You step out from the sterile, hushed corridors of international diplomacy and back into the thick, humid air of a Parisian evening in 1925. The transition is jarring. Behind you, the diplomats and the bureaucrats are still debating the ethics of trade and the definitions of medicine. But here, on the street, the debate is already over. The reality has arrived. You feel the vibration of the city beneath your feet, a low hum that seems to travel up through the soles of your shoes. It is the sound of the Les Années Falls, the crazy years, and it is louder than any treaty. You walk toward the hill of Montmartre. As the sun dips below the horizon, the sky turns a bruised shade of purple and orange. The white dome of the Sacré-Cœur glows like a ghost above the city, but you are moving away from the light. You are heading toward the shadows of Pigalle. The smell of the city hits you in waves. It is a mixture of expensive perfume, stale wine, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of the metro. It is the scent of a city that refuses to sleep because it is afraid of what it might see when it closes its eyes. You pass a row of cafes where the tables spill out onto the sidewalk. You see the faces of the young and the beautiful, illuminated by the warm glow of gas lamps and the new, flickering brilliance of neon signs. They are laughing, their heads thrown back, their pearls and silk ties shimmering. But as you look closer, you notice a tension in their eyes. There is a frantic quality to the joy. It is too loud, too fast, too desperate. You realize that this is a generation that has seen the world fall apart, and they are trying to outrun the memory of the trenches with jazz and gin. As you turn a corner into a narrow side street, the music changes. The bright brass of the big bands fades, replaced by the soulful, wailing moan of a saxophone coming from a basement club. This is the heart of the shadow world. You descend a set of damp stone steps, and the air grows heavy. It is thick with the sweet, cloying scent of opium, but there is something else underneath it. It is a sharper, cleaner smell. It is the scent of the laboratory. You push open the heavy wooden door and find yourself in a room that feels like it exists outside of time. The walls are draped in dark velvet to muffle the sound of the world above. Small lamps with red silk shades cast a bloody light over the patrons. You see artists whose names are whispered in the galleries of the left bank. You see heiresses who have traded their family jewels for a moment of peace. And you see the veterans, men with hollowed cheeks and steady hands, who are looking for the only thing that can silence the phantom thunder of the guns. In the center of the room, a woman sits at a small marble table. She is elegant, her hair bobbed in the latest fashion, her fingers long and slender. She is not drinking champagne. Instead, she holds a small silver snuff box. She opens it with a practiced click, revealing a pile of fine, white powder. You watch as she takes a small spoonful and lifts it to her nose. She inhales deeply, then leans back and closes her eyes. A look of profound, terrifying calm washes over her face. This is the white fairy. This is the hero that the city has been waiting for. You realize that heroin in 1920s Paris is not just a drug. It is a fashion. It is a rebellion. It is the ultimate accessory for the modern soul. In this room, the stigma that will one day surround this substance does not exist yet. Here, it is seen as something cleaner than alcohol and more sophisticated than opium. It is the drug of the future, a triumph of chemistry that promises to deliver you from the pain of the past without the messy hangover of the present. But you walk further into the club, and the illusion begins to crack. You see a man slumped in a corner booth. His tuxedo is rumpled, and his eyes are rolled back in his head. He is not calm. He is gone. You see the way his chest barely moves as he breathes. You see the gray tint of his skin. This is the side of the craze that the magazines do not talk about. This is the darker side of the Annie's Falls. You leave the club and walk back out into the cool night air, but the feeling of unease follows you. You start to see the signs everywhere. On the street corners, you see the sellers. They are not the hooded figures of a later era. They are ordinary men in flat caps and worn coats. They hide their glass vials in the linings of their jackets. They move with a quiet, efficient speed, exchanging small packets for crumpled banknotes. They are the new merchants of Paris, and their trade is booming. You follow a group of young people as they move from the club to a private apartment near the Place Clichy. You are an invisible observer in a world that is losing its grip on reality. Inside the apartment, the party continues, but the atmosphere has shifted. The laughter is gone, replaced by a strange, focused silence. You watch as someone brings out a set of needles. This is the moment where the craze turns into a crisis. The move from snorting the powder to injecting it is happening right before your eyes. You see the way they help each other, the way they search for a vein with the intensity of scientists. There is no joy in this ritual. There is only necessity. You realize that the freedom they were seeking has become a different kind of prison. The hero has become the master. You look around the room and see the debris of a lost decade. There are empty vials littering the floor like spent shell casings. There are poems scrawled on napkins that will never be finished. There is a sense of immense potential being slowly dissolved in a solution of distilled water and white powder. You think of the great minds of this era, the writers and the thinkers who believed that they could use these substances to unlock new levels of creativity. Instead, you see them being locked inside their own minds, unable to find the key to get back out. You walk to the window and look out over the rooftops of Paris. In the distance, the Eiffel Tower stands like a silent sentinel. The city looks so beautiful from here, so full of life and light. But you know what is happening in the rooms below. You know that the craze is spreading. It is moving from the bohemian circles of Montmartre to the working-class neighborhoods of the East. It is moving from the salons of the rich to the tenements of the poor. The authorities are starting to notice, but they are slow to react. They are still caught up in the old ways of thinking. They treat it as a moral failing or a minor vice. They do not yet understand the scale of what is happening. They do not see that the chemistry of the 19th century has created a monster that the 20th century is not prepared to handle. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the night air. You realize that you are witnessing the birth of a modern epidemic. This is not just a French problem. The vials you saw in the club and the apartment are the same ones you saw in the warehouses of Geneva. The commerce of the shadow world is global, and Paris is simply the most beautiful showroom. As the first light of dawn begins to streak the sky with gray, you walk back down the hill toward the center of the city. The street cleaners are out, hosing down the cobblestones, washing away the spills and the sins of the night before. But they cannot wash away the addiction. It is soaked into the very fabric of the city. You pass a young man sitting on a bench. He is wearing the remnants of a military uniform, a reminder of the war that ended only a few years ago. He is staring at his hands, which are shaking. He looks up at you, and for a moment, you see the absolute hollow emptiness in his eyes. He is not looking for a party. He is not looking for inspiration. He is just looking for the next dose. The Annie's Falls will be remembered for the jazz, the art, and the liberation. But as you walk through the waking streets, you know that this is only half the story. The other half is written in the dark corners of Pigalle, in the silent apartments of the wealthy, and in the trembling hands of the veterans. The White Fairy has cast a spell over Paris, and the city is waking up to find that the dream is turning into a nightmare. You stop at a small bakery that is just opening. The smell of fresh bread is warm and grounding, a stark contrast to the chemical scent of the clubs. You buy a croissant and stand on the corner, watching the city come to life. The shopkeepers are rolling up their metal shutters. The flower girls are setting out their buckets of roses. On the surface, it is the Paris the world loves. But you know better. You have seen the darker side. You have seen the cost of the craze. You finish your bread and start walking again. The sun is higher now, burning away the mist. But the shadows in the alleys remain. They are deep and long, and they are filled with the people the city wants to forget. You realize that the toss of the coin has already happened. The white powder and the white marble are two parts of the same machine. And that machine is now in motion, grinding through the lives of the people you have seen tonight. You take one last look back at the hill of Montmartre. The Sacré-Cœur is bright and blinding in the morning sun. It looks like a monument to purity and hope. But you know that at its feet, the darkness is still there, waiting for the sun to go down again. The party is not over, but the music is changing. It is becoming a dirge. And as you walk away, you can still hear the faint, haunting wail of that saxophone, echoing through the empty streets of the city that forgot how to sleep. The cold gray light of a Parisian morning in the early 1920s does not possess the same golden promise as the sunset. You find yourself standing on a street corner in the 10th arrondissement, pulling your wool coat tighter against a wind that smells of damp stone and coal smoke. The echoes of the jazz clubs have faded, and the frantic, joyful energy of the night has curdled into a brittle stillness. You look at your hands and notice they are trembling slightly, perhaps from the cold, or perhaps from the realization that the city you thought you knew has begun to change its shape. For years, Paris felt like an open playground where the boundaries of pleasure were limited only by the depth of your pockets. But today, as you look down the boulevard, you see something new. You see the shadow of the law. For a long time, the heroin craze was treated by the authorities as a decadent curiosity, a fringe habit of poets, sailors, and the wealthy bored. There was a sense of innocence, however misplaced, that this white powder was simply another fashion, a temporary obsession that would burn itself out like a bright flare. But by 1922, that illusion has shattered. The French state has realized that the flare is actually a wildfire. The honeymoon period of the Great Parisian High is over, and the era of the iron net has begun. You begin to walk toward a small pharmacy you have visited many times before. In the past, this was a simple transaction. You would walk in, offer a polite greeting to the chemist, present a loosely worded prescription or perhaps just a meaningful look and a few extra francs, and walk out with a neat little vial of Bayer or a packet of white dust. It was medical, it was clean, and it was quiet. But as you reach the door today, you stop. The window is no longer filled with cheerful displays of perfumes or tonics. Instead, a new, stern notice has been pasted to the glass. It outlines the updated regulations of the 1916 law, a piece of legislation that had been somewhat sleepy during the war, but is now being awakened with a vengeance. You realize that the chemist inside is no longer your friend. He is now a frightened agent of the state. Under the new pressures from the Ministry of the Interior, pharmacists are being forced to keep meticulous registers. Every gram of heroin, cocaine, or morphine must be accounted for in a ledger that can be inspected at any moment by the authorities. The penalties for discrepancies are no longer just fines. They are prison sentences and the permanent loss of a livelihood. You watch through the glass as a customer is turned away, the chemist shaking his head vigorously, his eyes darting toward the street as if he expects a gendarme to jump out from behind a lamp post. The door to the legal supply is swinging shut, and the lock is turning with a heavy, metallic click. This is the first strand of the iron net. By cutting off the pharmacies, the government is attempting to sever the link between the medical world and the street. But as you turn away from the shop, frustrated and anxious, you realize that this move has an unintended and dangerous side effect. When you take a substance that has become a necessity for thousands of people and you suddenly remove the legal, regulated source, you do not make the demand disappear. You simply move it into the dark. You walk toward the warren of streets near the Place Blanche, and the atmosphere feels different than it did only a year ago. There is a new kind of tension in the air, a prickling at the back of your neck. You are being watched, and not just by the usual street urchins or curious shopkeepers. This is the era of the Brigade de Stupéfiants, the specialized narcotics squad that is beginning to flex its muscles. They are a new breed of policemen, trained to look for the telltale signs that the average beat cop might miss. They look for the pinpoint pupils, the frantic scratching of the skin, the way a person lingers too long in the shadow of an alleyway. The innocence of the user is the second thing to go. In the early days, you might have felt like a pioneer of the senses, an explorer of new mental territories. Now you feel like a criminal. You find yourself ducking your head when a police patrol passes by, your heart hammering against your ribs. The law of 1916, which was once a bureaucratic abstraction, has become a physical presence in your life. It has redefined your identity. You are no longer a bohemian or a bon vivant. In the eyes of the French state, you are a toxic element, a source of national decay that must be purged. As you navigate the narrow streets, you witness the birth of the modern underground. Since the pharmacy is closed to you, you must find a middleman. You see a man leaning against a damp wall, his cap pulled low. This is the new face of the trade. He is not a chemist in a white coat. He is a trafficker. He doesn't care about the purity of the product or your well-being. He only cares about the risk he is taking, and that risk is reflected in the price. The cost of a gram is skyrocketing, and as the price goes up, so does the desperation. You see a woman approach him, her clothes expensive but rumpled, her face pale. A quick handoff occurs, a frantic exchange of crumpled banknotes for a small, dirty packet. This is the end of the pharmaceutical era. The heroin is no longer pure, the dosages are no longer certain, and the people selling it are no longer bound by any professional ethics. The iron net is tightening not just because of local police work, but because of a global shift. You might not hear the debates in the halls of the League of Nations in Geneva, but their echoes are felt right here on the cobblestones of Paris. International pressure is mounting on France to stop being the pharmacy of Europe. The world is looking at the decadence of Paris with a mixture of envy and horror, and the French government, eager to reclaim its status as a moral leader after the devastation of the Great War, is cracking down. They are terrified of what they call La Peste Blanche, the White Plague. They fear that heroin is sucking the strength out of the youth, the very generation that needs to rebuild the nation and defend its borders. You feel this national anxiety as you pass a newsstand. The headlines are no longer about the triumphs of the latest ballet or the scandalous antics of American jazz singers. Instead, they are filled with sensationalist accounts of drug dens and the downfall of respectable daughters. The media has turned the heroin user into a monster, a creature of the night who spreads infection and madness. This public outcry provides the political fuel for even harsher measures. You are witnessing the moment where the social contract of the Belle Époque, which valued individual liberty and private vice, is being replaced by a more rigid, collectivist morality. The psychological weight of this change is immense. You remember a time, perhaps only months ago, when you could sit in a cafe with friends and talk openly about the strange, crystalline dreams the powder brought you. Now you speak in whispers. You use code words. You look over your shoulder before you mention a name. The camaraderie of the user circles has been replaced by a pervasive paranoia. Anyone could be an informant. Any new face in the circle could be an undercover agent of the brigade. The net is not just made of laws and police officers. It is made of suspicion. You reach a small, dingy room in a boarding house where you know a few people still gather. The air inside is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and the bitter tang of chemicals. There is no music here, no laughter, no poetry. There is only the frantic business of the fix. You see the faces of your friends, and they have aged years in a matter of months. The iron net has trapped them, and as it pulls tighter, it crushes the spirit. The joy has been replaced by a grim, mechanical ritual. They are no longer chasing a high. They are merely trying to stave off the low. The end of innocence is not a single event, but a slow, painful erosion. It is the realization that the medicine has become a poison, and the playground has become a prison. As you stand in that darkened room, looking at the flickering candlelight reflecting in the eyes of the desperate, you understand that the Paris of the 1920s is bifurcating. There is the Paris of the postcards, the city of light and luxury, and there is the Paris of the shadow, where the iron net is dragging the forgotten through the mud. You decide to leave the room, the atmosphere too heavy to bear. Back out on the street, the morning sun is finally beginning to break through the clouds, but it offers no warmth. You see a police van rattling over the stones, its black curtains drawn tight. You know who is inside. The net has been cast and it is being hauled in. The casual, easy days of the heroin craze are dead. What remains is a world of secrets, of fear, and of a law that never sleeps. You walk away, your footsteps sounding hollow against the pavement, knowing that from this point on, every shadow you cross might be the one that doesn't let you go. The city hasn't changed its face, but it has changed its heart, and the warmth you once felt in its embrace has turned to the cold, unyielding grip of iron. You stand at the edge of the 1930s, looking back at a decade that felt like a fever dream. The jazz has begun to fade into a more somber, rhythmic swing, and the bright, frantic lights of Montmartre have dimmed just a fraction. You can feel the change in the air. The police raids of the late 20s did not simply vanish the white powder from the streets. Instead, they forced it underground into deeper, darker channels that the casual bohemian could no longer navigate. The frantic, public craze you witnessed in the cafes and dance halls has evolved. It has matured. It has become an industry. You walk away from the glittering boulevards of Paris and head south, following the invisible threads of commerce and crime. As you travel toward the Mediterranean, you realize that the chaos of the 1920s served as a massive, unplanned laboratory. In those crowded Parisian apartments where amateur chemists first tried to cook down bulk morphine, a new kind of expertise was born. The 1920s were the training grounds. The addicts, the dealers, and the middlemen who survived the crackdowns of the early years did not give up. They simply learned how to be professional. You arrive in Marseille, a city of salt, sun, and secrets. The air here smells of brine and rotting fruit, a sharp contrast to the perfume and cigarette smoke of the capital. You watch the ships roll into the old port, their hulls rusted by the sea. This is where the legacy of the Parisian craze truly takes root. You see, the demand that was sparked in the salons of Paris created a hunger that the local, small-time dealers could no longer satisfy. To keep the white powder flowing into the veins of the city, a global pipeline had to be built. As you walk along the docks, you notice men in dark caps leaning against crates, their eyes tracking every movement on the water. These are the architects of what the world will eventually call the French Connection. They are the descendants of the smugglers who once moved tobacco and silk, but they have found a much more lucrative cargo. The 1920s taught them that the world wanted heroin, and it wanted it in quantities that required industrial precision. The transition is fascinating and terrifying. You see how the frantic, individualistic nature of the heroin craze shifted into a structured, corporate form of organized crime. In Paris, the trade was often about a single person selling to another in a bathroom stall. In Marseille, it becomes about logistics. You watch the crates of raw opium arriving from the east, from the poppy fields of Turkey and the Levant. This raw material is no longer just for the smoking dens of the colonial sailors. It is now the base for a refined product that will define the century. You step into a small, nondescript building in a back alley of the city. The windows are boarded up, and the air inside is thick with the stinging, vinegar-like scent of acetic anhydride. This is a laboratory, though it looks nothing like the sterile environments of the modern day. Here, chemists who learned their trade during the wild years of the 20s are perfecting the art of turning morphine base into 90% pure heroin. This is the French trademark. While other criminal organizations around the world deal in diluted, low-quality product, the French syndicates pride themselves on purity. You are witnessing the birth of a brand. You realize that the crackdowns in Paris during the mid-20s had an unintended consequence. By making it harder to sell openly, the government forced the disparate gangs to organize. They had to form alliances. They had to buy off officials and create secure routes through the ports. The very laws intended to stomp out the craze actually provided the pressure needed to turn a scattered group of criminals into a diamond-hard syndicate. The Corsican families, with their deep bonds of blood and silence, began to dominate this landscape. They took the lessons of the Parisian streets and applied them to the global stage. You walk through the streets of Marseille and realize that the city has become a massive processing plant. The heroin refined here is no longer just destined for the artists of Montparnasse. The market has expanded. You look across the Atlantic, metaphorically, toward the skyline of New York. The end of Prohibition in the United States left the American mafia with a massive, sophisticated distribution network and no product to fill it. The Corsicans in France had the product but needed the customers. It was a match made in a very dark corner of heaven. The legacy of the 1920s craze is this infrastructure. You see the ghosts of the Parisian addicts in every shipment that leaves the port. Their initial hunger was the spark that ignited this fire. Without that first wave of demand in the heart of Europe, the massive laboratories of Marseille might never have been built. The sophisticated smuggling techniques, like using the hollowed-out hulls of cars or the secret compartments in transatlantic liners, were all refinements of the tricks used to get drugs past the Paris customs agents in 1924. You sit at a small table in a quiet square, watching the world go by. You think about the people you met in the earlier years of the craze. The poet who thought the drug would bring him clarity, the dancer who used it to keep her legs moving through the night, the veteran trying to forget the trenches. They are mostly gone now, either dead, imprisoned, or living in the gray shadows of addiction. But the machine they helped build is roaring to life. It is no longer a craze. It is a system. The French Connection would eventually supply the vast majority of the heroin to the United States for decades. It would become a staple of cinema and a nightmare for law enforcement across 2 continents. But as you sit here in the quiet sunshine of the 1930s, you can see that its DNA is entirely Parisian. The flamboyance is gone, replaced by the cold efficiency of the mob, but the heart of the trade remains the same. It is the same chemical, the same desperate need, and the same massive profits. You reflect on how the 1920s transformed France's relationship with narcotics. Before the craze, drugs were seen as an exotic vice, something found in the far-flung colonies or the dens of the very wealthy. By the time the decade closed, it was a national crisis that had birthed a permanent criminal underworld. The innocence of the city was not just lost, it was sold. You see the police on the corner, and you know that they are outmatched. They are fighting a war against an enemy that has become part of the very fabric of the economy. The immersive world you have inhabited, the world of velvet curtains and silver spoons and white powder, has crystallized into something much more dangerous. The Parisian heroin craze was the prologue. The story that follows is one of international intrigue, massive fortunes, and a level of corruption that reaches the highest levels of government. You see that history is not a series of isolated events, but a long, interconnected chain. The needle that entered a vein in a Paris basement in 1922 is the same needle that would define the streets of Harlem in 1960. As the sun begins to set over the Mediterranean, you feel the weight of this legacy. You understand now that the Roaring Twenties were not just about joy and liberation. They were a period of profound transition. The world was learning how to be modern, and part of that modernity was the creation of a global drug trade. The Parisian heroin craze was the moment the genie was let out of the bottle. And as you watch the shadows lengthen over the docks of Marseille, you know that no matter how hard the world tries, it will never be able to put the genie back in. You stand up and walk toward the water, the salt air stinging your eyes. You have seen the beginning of the end. You have seen how a few years of frantic indulgence in the heart of the world's most beautiful city created a monster that would haunt the world for a century. The French Connection is not just a story of gangsters and cops. It is the direct descendant of the 1920s, a legacy of a time when the world was moving too fast to see the cliff it was racing toward. You take one last look at the horizon, where the ships are departing for the west, carrying their silent, deadly cargo into the future. The craze is over, but the connection has only just begun.